Before the sewing machine became something ordinary on a table, in a factory, in a corner shop, or beside a grandmother teaching someone how to mend cloth, it was a desperate answer to a very old human burden. How long can hands keep doing this work alone? Long before fashion became fast, before ready-made clothing filled stores, before fabric could be stitched at industrial speed, sewing was measured in time, fatigue, and patience. A garment was not just made, it was labored into existence. And when the sewing machine arrived, it did far more than speed up thread. It changed work, home life, industry, and the rhythm of daily survival. Because the history of the sewing machine is not only the story of an invention, it is the story of how human beings tried to give exhausted hands a machine that could keep going. Main script. Before the sewing machine, sewing was slow in a way modern life can barely imagine. Every stitch had to be made by hand. Clothing, uniforms, household linens, repairs, and textile work depended on patient human effort repeated again and again. In that world, sewing was not just craft, it was labor, often invisible and often underpaid, carried heavily by women in homes and by workers whose time was consumed one stitch at a time. That is where the emotional truth of the sewing machine begins. It was never only about invention, it was about relief. And that is what makes its history so human. The dream of mechanizing sewing appeared before a truly successful machine existed. Many inventors struggled with the same problem. How do you reproduce with metal and motion? Something the human hand does with flexibility and control. Sewing looks simple from the outside, but mechanically it is very difficult. The needle must move precisely, the thread must interlock properly, the fabric must advance in rhythm. A machine could not simply push thread through cloth. It had to create a repeatable system strong enough to matter in real life. One of the earliest important breakthroughs came from Barthélemy Thimonnier in France. Britannica notes that he received a French patent in 1830 for a sewing machine designed to mass-produce uniforms for the French army. But the story did not unfold peacefully. In 1831, fearing the invention would ruin their livelihoods, some 200 tailors destroyed the machines. That moment reveals one of the deepest tensions in the history of technology. A machine that promises efficiency to one group can feel like a threat to another. The sewing machine was born not only into hope, but into fear. And that fear was not irrational. Because the sewing machine was about to change, who controlled time? When a task that once took countless human hours becomes mechanized, everything around that task begins to shift. Work speeds up, costs change, labor markets move, skill is redefined, power follows productivity. The sewing machine did not simply help people sew. It began redrawing the relationship between hand labor and industrial output. But in its early stages, it was still not fully solved. The idea existed. The future was visible. Yet the machine had not fully become the machine the world would remember. Then came Elias Howe. Smithsonian records note that in 1845 he built his first sewing machine, and in 1846 received U.S. patent number 4750 for an improved model. Britannica describes Howe as the inventor whose sewing machine helped revolutionize garment manufacture in the factory and in the home. His work mattered because he achieved a practical lock-stitch system using an eye-pointed needle and shuttle arrangement that became foundational. It was not the first attempt at a sewing machine, but it was a turning point. The machine was no longer only imaginable. It was defensible, patentable, and mechanically convincing. That was the first great transformation. Sewing stopped being only a human rhythm. It became a mechanical rhythm. And once that happened, history moved faster. Howe's machine was a breakthrough, but it did not instantly make him secure. Smithsonian notes that he spent years defending his patent, and the story of the sewing machine soon became as much about lawsuits and business as about invention itself. This is another quiet truth of industrial history. A successful machine does not enter the world alone. It arrives with conflict over ownership, profit, and control. The sewing machine was valuable enough that people fought over who had the right to build it, sell it, and profit from it. Then came Isaac Singer, and with him another crucial shift. Britannica notes that in 1851, after being asked to repair a Leroux and Blodgett sewing machine, Singer designed and built an improved model in just 11 days. His machine embodied features that allowed continuous and curved stitching, with an overhanging arm and horizontal table that made practical use much easier. Britannica also notes that Singer's original design became the first practical sewing machine for general domestic use. even though it incorporated the eye-pointed needle and lock-stitch principles developed by Howe, who later won a patent infringement suit against him in 1854. And maybe that is the twist at the heart of this history. The sewing machine was not created by one genius in one perfect moment. It was assembled out of struggle, rivalry, refinement, and repeated improvement. That makes the story more honest. The sewing machine did not descend from history complete and pure. It was argued into existence, patented into existence, improved into existence. And in 1856, after years of lawsuits, Howe, Wheeler and Wilson, Grover and Baker, and I.M. Singer formed what Smithsonian calls the first patent pool in American industry, the sewing machine combination. This mattered enormously. It allowed key patent holders to license their technologies and helped stabilize one of the earliest great machine industries in the United States. Once that happened, the sewing machine could spread more widely. And when it spread, it changed everything. Factories could produce garments more quickly. Uniforms, workwear, household goods, and commercial textiles could be made at a scale hand sewing could never match. Britannica notes that Howe's invention helped revolutionize garment manufacture in both factory and home. That phrase matters, factory and home. The sewing machine lived in both worlds. It was industrial and intimate at the same time. In workshops and large manufacturing spaces, it accelerated production. In homes, it changed the pace of repairs, dressmaking, and domestic labor. Few inventions managed to reshape both public industry and private household routines so deeply. But the sewing machine did not simply reduce labor. In some cases, it intensified it in new forms. That is one of the harder truths to hold. Mechanization can free hands, but it can also demand more output from those same hands. Garment work became faster, but factories could also become harsher. Piecework could become more relentless. Workers could be judged by speed rather than only skill. A machine that saves labor in theory can still become part of a system that extracts more labor in practice. The sewing machine belongs to that complicated history. It was both liberating and disciplining. It opened opportunity, but it also tightened industrial expectations. This is an inference from how the machine expanded factory garment manufacture and home use together. And yet, even with all that complexity, the sewing machine carried a deeply personal meaning, because it entered homes. For many families, especially in the late 19th and 20th centuries, the sewing machine became more than a machine. It became a household presence, a mother sewing clothes, a tailor in a small shop, a child watching a foot treadle move, a hem repaired before school, curtains made by hand, a wedding dress adjusted late at night. In these scenes, the sewing machine was not abstract industry. It was survival, thrift, dignity, and care. It allowed people to make, repair, alter, and preserve what they had. It turned fabric into necessity, and necessity into memory. This emotional role grows naturally from its documented role in the home, and that may be why the sewing machine still feels so intimate. It works with cloth, and cloth lives close to the body. Unlike some machines that operate far away in factories or infrastructure, the sewing machine touches the material of daily life directly. It helps make what people wear, sleep under, work in, and hand down. That makes its history feel warmer, closer, more personal than the history of many industrial inventions. A sewing machine can be a factory tool, but it can also be a family heirloom. It can represent wage labor, but also creativity. It can mean mass production, but also handmade care. Over time, sewing machines kept evolving. Britannica notes that sewing machines may be powered by treadle, water power, or electricity. That long arc tells its own story. The machine adapted to different eras of energy and work. It moved from mechanical ingenuity into electrified convenience. It became faster, more specialized, and more accessible. And the more ordinary it became, the more powerful its influence became. Like many transformative inventions, its greatest success was to disappear into normal life. That was perhaps its greatest victory. It became ordinary. Not ordinary because it was small in impact, but ordinary because the world rearranged itself around what it made possible. Ready-made clothing expanded, domestic sewing changed, tailoring changed, factory production changed, fashion accelerated, repair work became easier in some contexts and less central in others. The sewing machine helped create the modern relationship between people and clothing, faster production, wider access, and new expectations about how garments are made and owned. This is a grounded inference from its role in revolutionizing garment manufacture in factory and home. And maybe that is the final lesson. The history of the sewing machine is not really about a needle and thread. It is about time. It is about how long work takes, who performs it, who profits from it, and how technology changes the value of human effort. A sewing machine does not merely stitch cloth, it compresses hours. It reorganizes labor. It turns patience into output. And at its most human, it also turns care into something sustainable. It helps people keep clothes wearable, make beauty practical, and transform fabric into evidence that someone took the time to make life hold together. So when you see a sewing machine now, do not see only metal, pedals, motors, or gears. See Thimonnier trying to mechanize uniforms in 1830. See the frightened tailors who smashed the machines in 1831. See Elias Howe building his first model in 1845 and patenting it in 1846. See Singer refining the machine into practical domestic form in 1851. See the patent wars, the combination of 1856, the factories, the parlors, the workshops, the careful repairs, the dresses altered at midnight, the workers bent over cloth, and the families who depended on one machine to stretch money, preserve dignity, and make something last a little longer. Because the history of the sewing machine is, in the end, not just the history of an invention. It is the story of how human beings tried to give skill, care, and survival a faster rhythm. And maybe that is why it still matters. Not because it replaced the hand, but because it changed what the hand could endure. CTA, if you stayed until the end, then maybe a sewing machine no longer feels like just another household or factory tool to you. Maybe it feels more like memory, labor, survival, creativity, or one of those quiet inventions that changed human life stitch by stitch. So, I'd love to hear from you. When you think about a sewing machine, what does it mean to you most? Hard work, care, independence, tradition, or something deeper? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if this story stayed with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell for more storytelling videos about the ordinary inventions and hidden machines that quietly shaped human history.